Thoreau is a very interesting place to start when talking about how to escape corporate America. Corporate America is in many ways a jail or a prison that most people willingly walk into. And I wanted to start with Thoreau when he wrote Walden. He said, "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. I did not wish to live what was not life. Living is so dear, nor do I wish to practice resignation unless it was quite necessary. I wanted to live deep and suck out the marrow of life, to live so sturdily and Spartan-like as to put to rout all that was not life, to cut a broad swath and to shave close." Pretty deep thing there that Thoreau is saying. And later he also says a very profound quote about most men live a life of quiet desperation. I would say that's really the way to describe corporate America, is a life of quiet desperation. So what this podcast is about is how can you really think about corporate America as a prison, and what you can do to dig your way out, like the lead character in the movie Shawshank Redemption. It's not going to be easy, but what are the ways that you can reframe corporate America as a prison that you're going to escape from? So first up, let's take a look at what's really going on with the work in corporate America. I think a good place to start would be the book Bullshit Jobs by David Graeber. A pretty interesting rabbit hole to go down if you want to read all of his books. But let's start with what he talks about in terms of bullshit jobs. There are 5 bullshit jobs that he identified, and it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek. I think you can't take everything that he says to be like academic, literature. It's a little bit of fun, which I think is why it's interesting. But if we take a look at flunkies here, this is the first job. These are jobs that exist to make other people feel important. So these are middle managers in corporations. They they actually exist everywhere. It's unclear really what they do, especially in tech. Maybe they're a middle manager that is reporting to another middle manager that reports to another middle manager. The more hierarchical there is of an organization, the more of these jobs exist. These flunkies are really there to add like layers. I remember working at a big Fortune 10 company where there was just managers on managers and managers, and there was the person that was in charge, and I could just never talk to the person in charge because they wanted to hide behind all these layers. When I talked to the person in charge, wasn't very impressed, and I think what they were doing was adding these layers so that they could basically not expose the fact that they don't do anything either. Likewise, universities, I think you see this sometimes as well, where you see layers and layers and layers and layers of people, or the people that are at the very high level are in Zoom meetings all day. Like, what's going on here, right? So there's a lot of flunkies that are existing just so that the people at the top can be justified. And we'll get into that later when we talk about why CEOs are getting paid $100 million a year, or in some cases billions of dollars per year, 10,000 times what a regular employee is. If you don't have all those flunkies, it's hard to justify that pay. Now, the next section is goons. So these goons are hired to be aggressive on behalf of an organization. I've definitely come across goons before. Big companies have sent me like nasty letters. Hey, you can't do this, or or I've worked with goons. I would say HR is probably the biggest example of a goon. Human resources in most companies, the goal is to gain your trust and then to betray you. That's really the key goal of HR. There's really no upside to HR for the regular employee. It's not like they're an ombudsman or protecting the regular employees through union rights or something. It's really a way to assert power and be aggressive on top of the organization. Also to just fire people so that the boss doesn't have to go face to face. I mean, firing people, unfortunately, I've had to do this in my life, is a really unpleasant thing. And unless you are a sociopath, it affects you. You don't like firing people, but HR itself is essentially this mechanism to do this very aggressive firing on behalf of other people. So this is a form of soft authoritarianism. We also have in the next category duct-tapers. So these are people who fix problems that shouldn't exist, right? These are not directly shown necessarily in organizations until you dig into it. Then you go, oh yeah, you actually don't do anything. You just fix a problem over and over and over again. You see this a lot in software engineering companies where someone just continually fixes the same bug over and over and over again because the culture doesn't let them fix the root cause. This is often the case in really dysfunctional organizations. These are some of the things that a duct taper would do. A box ticker is another one. Let's say it's DEI today, but tomorrow it's Christian fascism, or the next administration, it's energy efficiency. And then the next administration, it's use as much energy as possible. Whatever political winds are blowing, the box ticker is going to go through and check it, because corporations have no ethical compass. They'll do whatever they can to make money, etc. So box ticking really is also a complete bullshit job. A lot of the corporate initiatives that are doing something are about box ticking. And then we have Taskmaster, which for people in the software, this is the fifth category. People in the software industry have seen these people. It's people that have zero clue about how to build things, but what are they doing? They're telling other people how to build things, and they're telling them, hey, get to work, go faster, go faster. A Scrum Master is probably the one I've personally come across that I would definitely say it's a bullshit job. I've seen them destroy the productivity of teams because they're pulling them into all these meetings constantly instead of actually getting work done. So to start with this, in terms of why I wanted to start in this category, is that at first we should describe that just because you're in a corporation doesn't mean the work is actually going to be useful, A, because we know there's a lot of bullshit jobs. And second, you have to get out of this. You have to figure out ways to work on stuff that really matters and to build skills that really matters. So if you're one of these five categories, a goon, a duct taper, a box ticker, a taskmaster, a flunky, you have to quickly get out so that you can build skills to escape. Now, if we take a look next here at, let's talk about the authoritarian regime, I guess, of corporate America. When you really look at it, if you look at, I don't know, authoritarian regimes in the past, like maybe Stasi East Germany or Italy, of course, they're more overtly authoritarian, very bad problems. Like, if you try to escape East Germany, they would imprison you. If you're in fascist Italy in the 1930s, you could get beaten up or killed, right? So obviously those are much worse, but there's a soft authoritarianism, a soft fascism that's always kind of been there with American corporations. And let me describe some of the ones. So one of them is an American corporation can tell you where to live. For example, if they have a lot of soft power, they can say, you're not working remote. I don't care if you're more productive. I want to have power over you. I want to control whether you spend time with your family or not. I want you to be on the road for 2 hours a day, and you're going to work inside the office, right? So that's a form of soft authoritarianism. So they're really telling you how to live, right? If you really dive into it, you're going to work 9 to 5. You're going to drive in your car at 7. You're going to go to the gym at 6:30. And then when you're done, you're going to have drinks after work with the other people at work. And then you're going to drive back home and spend an hour with your family. That's your life. And I'm telling you how to live it. So if you think about it in that sense, like, wow, that's a lot of control that some random organization that is authoritarian is actually putting onto you, right? So that's one. Another one is what to think. And I think this is an interesting one where if the current regime in America, which does look like it's fascist, hadn't come into power, it would be harder to make this point. But now it's easy to make the point, which is that corporations have no ethical compass. Their ethical compass is essentially like a flag blowing in the wind. It'll blow one way one week, one way another. So you can see that for a long time, American corporations were woke and they were into DEI, and they're believing all of these things about we think that there should be um, people that are hired based on not only skill, but also we want to make sure that we have lots of different opinions, and we want to have lots of different cultures, which by the way, I want to say I personally believe in. I do think diversity is a great way to have a good culture in an organization, but that's what they said. But then now if we look at what's happening, now we have a complete flip. Now it's all removed, right? And so you could even make the case where some organizations, they want to actually promote Christian fascism, right? And what is Christian fascism? Well, we're going to teach Christian values to our workers, and fascism is really an alignment of industry with authoritarian regimes that are ultra-nationalistic. Well, that does appear to be happening. So now maybe corporations are Christian fascist, but who knows? Maybe in 4 years they'll be woke again, or maybe they'll be really into green energy, or maybe they'll be into war and you have to make war weapons. So essentially the corporation tells you what to think, and it depends on what the year is, who's in charge. What is that? That's mind control. So why are you having to make your ethical decisions based on your employer? That's a form of authoritarianism. You could even go back into Stasi East Germany and say this is kind of similar of like a programming where you're telling people exactly what to think. Related to this, we also have what to work on. So let's take a look at maybe a corporation and you're a software engineer and they ask you to work on some features. It's not like you can choose, hey, I heard Rust is really efficient and it's a green energy technology. It's 100 or 1,000 times more efficient than Python. Let's go ahead and use Rust. Well, your boss might say, no, we use Python. We use a language that's 35 years old because I want to use it. I understand what Python is. Python's simple. I understand simple things, so we'll work on simple things. Now, if you work for yourself, like I do, I could work on anything I want. One day I wake up, I'm going to work on Zig. One day I wake up, I'm going to work on Rust. But if you're working for another corporation, they're intellectually going to tell you the sophistication that your mind is capable of understanding. So that's a problem. And then if we look at the other components of ethics, we can see that many startups, Y Combinator is a perfect example, Andreessen, they practice something called regulatory entrepreneurship, is they find areas where there's something that does need some improvement, let's say the taxi industry or rental market for rooms, and they exploit it by making something that's an illegal hotel, illegal taxi. Then they go really fast, they hyperscale it, and they then leave those negative externalities to the public. Hey, homelessness globally is increasing. Who cares, right? Or we've increased traffic to San Francisco because we have all these Ubers circling. Who cares, right? That's not my problem. My problem is regulatory entrepreneurship. I want exponential returns, and I want to make more money, and I want a rent-seek society. Maybe you think that's unethical. Well, you don't have a choice because you're actually working for an organization. That's their business practice. Another one is stealing intellectual property. Pretty clear to most people that you can't just steal people's books and movies, especially if it's in a pirated website or a pirate location. We've seen that there's these pirate locations where people have collected all of the books and collected all of the movies, etc. And that's an illegal act that corporations have been greenlighting. What if you don't agree with that? What are you supposed to do? You have to quit, right? Like if your company is stealing IP, if you send an email to the CEO and says, hey, I don't think we should be training our models on terabytes of stolen books that you took off of the dark web, what are you going to do? You're going to get fired, right? So there's a form of authoritarianism that's directly coming from the leadership of the organization. Likewise, the one that I think is less controversial of anything I've said so far is, why are CEOs getting paid 10,000, 20,000 times what a regular worker is paid. Everyone knows they're not worth that. Maybe twice what the worker, right? If the worker is getting paid 100,000, the CEO should be paid 200,000. But other than that, this excess pay is just essentially greed, theft. It's a repression of other workers. I guess they're paying the CEO that much money, so they have zero ethics. So they'll do anything. So if you look at those kinds of authoritarian concepts, you realize like, wow, there's something cooking here with corporate America, and it's an authoritarian infrastructure. Finally, the ultimate component of this is that you have to trade time versus value. If you work for yourself, you're focused on value. So a lot of the stuff I've done in the last 10 years working for myself is value-based. Maybe I spend an hour on it, but it has value that is the value of 3 months of work. Or I could spend a lot of time on something and there's no value because I just personally find it interesting. By working for myself, I have that choice. If I'm working for a corporation, I don't have that choice. You're going to work a fixed amount of time. It doesn't matter how much value you brought in that day, you're still going to work that fixed amount of time. And that's what's really terrible, is that you're essentially selling your life away. And now let's dive into what Chomsky would call this, or Graeber, both have talked about this, is this that different than other forms of slavery historically? If you're selling yourself or you're renting yourself out to somebody else, it's a form of slavery. And wage slavery would be the way to describe it. And especially because you have these mechanisms that trap you in. The mechanisms that trap you in include healthcare is tied to the employer. Student debt makes it so that you must get a job where you get paid reasonably well to pay off that student debt. We also have union memberships have decreased since 1980. Reagan destroyed the unions, so you have less power. You can be fired at any time, so you have to obey. All of these forms of repression and repression of worker rights have made it so that you really have no choice. You're in a semi-involuntary form of slavery by working in American corporations. Okay, so that's all the really negative. I think probably people already know all that. Now, let's get into resistance, which is something I think is a kind of a fun topic. Okay, so you want to escape. What are some of the ways that you could escape corporate America and resist this authoritarianism and fascism that's emerging? Well, one of them is to have a quiet resistance. One way I did it when I was working for other organizations is try to go to the fewest amount of meetings as possible. That's one way to resist, is that you need to have a plan to build value and to build skills versus build political will in an organization. Now, if you plan on being in the prison and, really making a beautiful home in the prison and being friends with the prison guards, then sure, show up to the meetings, do all of the bullshit jobs they ask you to do, maybe even become a flunky or a goon or whatever. But if you want to escape, you have to figure out a way to focus on skills that create value. So if you're working for yourself and you have skills that create value, for example, Thoreau even got into this in 1820, is that could you have a chicken coop where you can manage chickens that give you eggs, right? Well, in today's society where eggs can cost $10 a dozen, boy, that could be a good skill, right? As just kind of a simple one to describe. Or if you're a software engineer, maybe your company does something with front-end development, but you've decided that you could build a mobile app. Well, you should be focusing on value. How could you do the whole value chain yourself? Not like a subcomponent of it, but what if you had to actually be the person creating an entire company? How could you focus your time on this? And this is really the idea, is that you have to first realize you're being oppressed, and then second, really build a comprehensive plan to escape. And part of that comprehensive plan is that you have to have the right skills in order to be able to escape corporate America. And to do that, you have to have real valuable skills, not the skills of politics, the skills of working on bullshit jobs. So part of it is going to be, once you've decided that, is to avoid these meetings And in fact, if you work remote, even better, right? So those would be two: avoid meetings, work remote if possible. Another one is, even if you can't do that, is you have to spend at least 20% of your day, if not more, focusing on skills that are valuable, unrelated to anything that's happening in your company. So for example, let's say you think that Rust is an amazing language because you can build backend services, or it's Zig, or it's Swift, or whatever. Then you should be spending that time, regardless of what your manager or what your company's focused on. Who cares what their corporate goals are, or their current DEI initiative, or their current Christian fascism initiative, or what their current whatever it is initiative is, or what the CEO says. The CEO is exploiting you. Who cares what they think? What you should be thinking about is, how do I get out? How do I escape and build skills so that I can be able to live on my own and make my own revenue? So part of that is to also avoid a management job. This is a trap as well. I've actually lived all over the world and worked at places. I remember a very smart person told me one time that was doing creating like rental properties for a organization as a side time gig. When they worked as a software engineer, they said, yeah, I avoid management jobs because those are basically thankless jobs where you're essentially like a goon who's doing all this stuff that really has no value, and you're not learning skills or learning ways to make money. So that's really the goal, is to resist by participating as least as possible while building skills to escape. And one way to think about that would be to think about the movie Shawshank Redemption. That's really what happened with the character in Shawshank Redemption, Tim Robbins, is that he was wrongfully imprisoned. Like, you could make that argument. Many people in America are wrongfully put into this involuntary slavery of corporate America. And so what did he do? He made friends on the outside with the prison guards, the head of the prison, kind of did what he had to do, just sucked it up. But quietly, he was taking his spoon and he dug a hole in the wall, and he walked down to the yard and he sprinkled out that dirt. So it took him years, right, to piece by piece dig his way out of that prison and then finally escape. That's really, I think, the goal for many people, is to, how do you reduce the amount of money that you spend? How do you live in lower cost regions? How do you reduce any debt, reduce the consumption? Even Thoreau talked about this. How do you live a simpler life so that you have the ability to escape? Because once you have enough money where you could live for, let's say, a couple years without needing a corporate salary, you effectively have the pathway to escape. It doesn't mean you're fully escaping yet, but it means that if you also at the same time have developed valuable skills, so for example, you know how to build applications, or I don't know, maybe you're building carpentry skills where you could be a freelance carpenter, or you, I don't know, are learning how to be self-sufficient. You have your own land. There's essentially infinite ways that you could figure out a way to live off of like a couple years of salary, and then build something that starts to put the money inside of your bank account. That is really the strategy of escape. Now let's talk a little bit about some of the off-ramps to get out. So one of them would be consulting. So let's say, again, you have 2 years of salary. You have, I don't know, let's just say you have $250,000 in the bank, and what could you do to survive and keep that $250,000 there so that it's a protection for you? Well, one of the ways is to take 2 or 3 different consulting jobs. So you could work, and if they're uncorrelated, the better, right? Like maybe you're doing something really long term. Let's say you have carpentry skills, and maybe it's very in demand for the area you live, and you spend just a day or two doing these kind of carpentry skills. That could be uncorrelated to the tech industry, or uncorrelated to real estate sales, or something like that. And then you have a couple more days in the week where you're working on something that's a long term. Maybe it's building a mobile app, or it's building some kind of an advisory company, or something like that. And then you have a third thing that you're doing. I like that strategy because they're uncorrelated, and those uncorrelated revenue streams, maybe it's an investment, maybe you bought some kind of business, or you You have some other thing is that each of those uncorrelated streams are feeding into that 250,000 that you saved up, and it's slowly getting higher and higher and higher to higher. Likewise, at the very end of the goal would be to wake up every day and do whatever you want versus doing things that you're told to do. So I guess that's really the way to wrap up this particular section, is that I think it's first important to realize that corporate America is a form of soft authoritarianism, and that you shouldn't feel like the fact that you don't want to work there is a bad thing. It's a good thing. If you don't want to work in corporate America, in many ways, it's a good sign, because it means that there's at least a chance for you to escape a life that Thoreau talked about of quiet desperation.